My name is Leah Calloway. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a paralegal at a small estate law firm in Columbus, Ohio. I know what probate fraud looks like. I know the paperwork, the timelines, the red flags. I've filed the motions. I've sat across the conference table from people who thought they were clever. I just never thought I'd be sitting across that table from my own mother. My grandfather passed away 14 months ago. He was 78, sharp as a tack until the very end, and he left behind a small but meaningful estate, a paid-off house in Gahana, worth around $340,000, a savings account with $87,000, some personal property, and a life insurance policy that named my younger sister and me as direct beneficiaries. He had a will. He had everything in order. He was that kind of man. Careful, deliberate. He used to say, "The kindest thing you can do for your family is to make it easy for them after you're gone." He made it easy, and then my mother made it complicated. I want to be fair before I tell you what she did. My mother wasn't always like this. I have memories, good ones, of her making pancakes on Saturday mornings, driving my sister and me to swim practice at 6 in the morning without complaint, sitting in the back row of every school play, even when she was exhausted from a double shift. She loved us. I believe that. I still believe it. But grief does strange things to people, and so does the sudden, unexpected presence of money when you've been just barely scraping by for 20 years. My grandfather named her executor of his estate. She was his only child. On paper, it made sense. At the time he wrote the will, none of us had any reason to think it wouldn't. The first few weeks after the funeral were normal. She filed the will with the probate court. She sent the required notices. I even offered to help her. I draft these documents at work every week. I know them by heart, but she waved me off. "I've got it handled, sweetheart. Don't worry." I didn't push. She had just lost her father. I gave her space. Then the months started to pass. My younger sister, who I'll call Bria, had just turned 19 when our grandfather died. She was supposed to start her sophomore year at Ohio State the following fall. Our grandfather had known this. He'd talked about it constantly in his last year. "I'm going to make sure that girl gets her degree," he'd say, squeezing Bria's hand. The estate wasn't a fortune, but split between the two of us, it was enough to get Bria through school without debt and leave me with a modest cushion. 4 months after the funeral, Bria asked my mother about the probate timeline. My mother said the court was backed up. 6 months in, she said there were title issues with the house. 8 months in, she stopped giving specific answers at all. "These things take time," she'd say. "The lawyers are handling it." The lawyers were not handling it. I know because I pulled the court docket myself. The estate had been sitting. No status updates had been filed. No inventory had been submitted to the court, which is required within 90 days in Ohio. The only activity was the original filing. I sat at my desk at work and stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called the courthouse clerk and asked a few quiet questions. That's when I found out the house had been refinanced. A home equity line of credit, $60,000, filed 8 weeks after my grandfather was buried, while my mother was telling us the estate was in process. She had used her authority as executor to take out a lien against a property she did not yet legally own, against an estate she had not yet closed, against a house that belonged to me and my sister as much as it belonged to her. I closed my laptop. I went to the bathroom. I stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists for a minute, which is something I do when I need to think clearly. Then I walked back to my desk and I started building a file. I did not call my mother. I did not confront her. I did not say a single word. Here's what you have to understand about working in estate law. When you suspect someone of mismanaging an estate, the absolute worst thing you can do is tip them off. The moment they know you know, documents disappear. Accounts get drained. Suddenly, there are explanations for everything and nothing can be proven. I had watched this happen to clients. I was not going to let it happen to me and Bria. I started paying attention in a different way. My mother had been living in my grandfather's house since the week after he died. That wasn't unusual on its face. She'd been his primary caretaker in his last 2 years, and someone needed to maintain the property during probate. But now I started noticing things. New furniture visible through the front window when I dropped Bria off for dinner. A contractor's truck in the driveway. My mother mentioning a bathroom renovation like it was a perfectly natural thing to be doing in a house that wasn't legally hers yet, using money from a lien that shouldn't exist. I started keeping a log. Dates, observations, photos. I am a paralegal. Documentation is not optional. The thing that broke it open wasn't what I expected. My firm handles a lot of will contests. I've read hundreds of wills, codicils, amendments. I know what they look like. I know the formatting, the language, the specific phrasing that estate attorneys in Ohio use. I know my grandfather's will backward and forward. I'd read it 3 times after he passed, just to understand what we were dealing with. His original will divided the estate equally between my mother, my sister, and me, 1/3 each. His house, his savings, everything split 3 ways. He had been explicit about it. He'd shown it to me once, actually, sitting at his kitchen table, and explained every line. I went back to the probate court and formally requested a copy of the full filing, every page. My mother, as executor, had submitted it, and there, attached as an addendum, was a codicil I had never seen. It was dated 14 months before my grandfather died. It stated that, due to his wishes to ensure the family home remained in the family line, he was amending his bequest to grant 60% of the estate's real property value to his daughter, my mother, with the remainder split between his granddaughters. I read it 3 times. Then I took out my phone and called my grandfather's actual estate attorney, the one who had drafted the original will, a woman named Patricia who had known my grandfather for 20 years. She had never seen that codicil. She had not drafted it. It had not passed through her office. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the timestamp on my phone the whole time. I was not crying. I was not angry. I was doing what I always do under pressure, which is go very, very quiet and very, very cold and very, very focused. My mother had forged a document. She had attached a fraudulent codicil to my grandfather's estate filing. She had used it to claim 60% of the home's value for herself, roughly $204,000, while leaving Bria and me to split 40% of the remainder. And she had simultaneously taken out a $60,000 lien against the property she was claiming. Bria's tuition, her sophomore year, the thing our grandfather had promised her. It was sitting in my mother's house, covered in new throw pillows and fresh tile grout. I want to tell you that I handled this with complete composure. I mostly did. But I need to be honest about one night. About 2 weeks after I found the codicil, when I sat at my kitchen table at midnight with a cup of tea I never drank and just stared at the wall. This is the part nobody talks about when someone in your family betrays you. It's not the anger that gets you. The anger is almost a relief, because it's clean and it has direction. It's the grief underneath the anger that catches you off guard. The grief for the version of your mother you thought existed. The grief for the family you thought you were part of. I had spent 31 years believing that whatever else went wrong in my life, my mother was on my side. That she was, at minimum, safe. And sitting at that table, I had to accept that I'd been wrong about that in a way I couldn't go back from. I thought about calling Bria. I didn't. She was 19. She was still in that stage of life where she believed our mother was just disorganized and overwhelmed. I was not going to take that from her before I had to. I was going to handle this first. I contacted a probate attorney, not someone from my firm, someone I found independently, so there would be no conflict of interest. Her name was Dana, and when I laid out my documentation across her conference table, she was quiet for a long time. "This is textbook executor misconduct," she said. "The forged codicil alone is grounds for removal and criminal referral. The HELOC on top of it is a separate matter. Combined, you're looking at potential elder estate fraud charges?" Then she said something I'd said to clients myself many times, and it hit very differently from the receiving side. "Before we file anything, let's see how much more rope she'll take." I went home and I called my mother. I kept my voice the way I keep it at work, warm, a little tired, completely unconcerned. I told her I'd been thinking about the estate timeline and I was a little worried, just as a practical matter, about Bria's tuition deadlines. Was there any update? My mother sighed. She said the probate judge had requested additional documentation about the property valuation. She said it could be another few months. She said, and I wrote this down verbatim as she said it, "I know it's frustrating, but I'm doing everything I can. You know how much Grandpa meant to me. I'm trying to honor his wishes." I told her I understood. I thanked her. I said I'd let Bria know. I let her keep going for 3 more weeks. During those 3 weeks, I finished building my file. I had the original will. I had the forged codicil with its inconsistent formatting. The typeface didn't match any document Patricia's office used, and the notary stamp was from a notary who, when I tracked her down, had no record of ever meeting my grandfather. I had the HELOC documentation, the disbursement records, the contractor invoices she'd pulled from the estate account. I had a timeline that made a very clear picture. On a Tuesday morning, I filed a petition to remove my mother as executor on the grounds of misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and suspected fraud. Dana filed it. I was not named as the filing party on the initial documents, a technicality, but a useful one. My mother found out when the court sent her notice. She called me 20 minutes later. Her voice was like nothing I'd ever heard from her before. Not angry, not sad, just cold. She said she didn't know what I thought I was doing. She said I was making a terrible mistake. She said she had only been trying to protect what was hers, that she had given up years of her life caring for my grandfather, that the codicil reflected what he had actually wanted, even if the paperwork wasn't done through the right channels. The right channels, I said. You mean the channels that don't involve forging a document and committing probate fraud? She hung up. She called back 4 minutes later and her voice had changed. Now she was crying. She said she'd been drowning in debt since the divorce. She'd been hiding how bad it was. She said she'd panicked. She said she hadn't meant for it to go this far. She said she needed me to withdraw the petition, that we could work this out as a family, that Grandpa wouldn't have wanted this. I listened to all of it, and then I said, I'm going to need you to come to Dana's office on Thursday. Bring whatever documentation you have. She did not want to come. She came anyway, because by that point she had spoken to her own attorney, who had very clearly explained her situation to her. I want to describe that Thursday to you, not because I'm proud of how it felt, but because I think it's important to be honest. My mother walked into that conference room looking smaller than I had ever seen her. She sat down across from me, and she couldn't hold my eyes for more than a second at a time. Bria wasn't there. I had not told Bria yet, and I will get to why. Dana walked her through the documentation. The forged codicil, the HELOC, the contractor invoices paid from estate funds for personal renovations, the timeline of misrepresentation. My mother's attorney advised her not to speak. She nodded at everything Dana said. I had prepared a settlement agreement. It was not complicated. My mother would resign as executor immediately. She would repay the $60,000 drawn from the HELOC into the estate. She had access to personal credit she'd been managing, and Dana had confirmed this was feasible. The estate would be administered by a court-appointed independent administrator and probated according to the original will 1/3 each. My mother would be permitted to continue living in the house for 60 days to allow her to find alternative housing, after which it would be listed for sale and proceeds distributed. In exchange, Dana would not refer the matter to the county prosecutor's office. Option B was that we filed a criminal complaint. The house got tied up in proceedings for a year, and my mother faced elder estate fraud charges that carried a real possibility of jail time. Her attorney leaned over and spoke quietly to her for about 2 minutes. Then my mother picked up the pen and signed. She cried the whole time she was signing. I did not cry. I sat very still, and I watched her hand move across the paper, and I thought about my grandfather at his kitchen table, showing me his will, telling me he wanted to make it easy. I thought about Bria at 19 years old, working a part-time job at a coffee shop to save up for books, waiting on a distribution that had been sitting frozen for over a year because our mother needed new bathroom tile. The crying was real. I don't doubt that. But it was also a performance. My mother has always been the main character of her own story. In her version, she was the devoted daughter who had sacrificed the most and deserved to be compensated. In her version, the codicil wasn't fraud, it was just a formality, a correction, a reflection of some unspoken understanding. In her version, my grandfather would have wanted this. We were all just supporting characters who didn't understand the full picture. That's the thing about people like her. They don't experience themselves as thieves. They experience themselves as people who are finally taking what they were owed. The crime doesn't register as a crime. It registers as a correction. I told Bria that night. I drove to her apartment, the one she shared with 2 roommates near campus, and I sat her down at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and I walked her through everything, not in legal language. In plain language, the way you talk to someone you love when you have to break something inside them. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, she was acting so sad at the funeral. I thought it was real. I said, it probably was real. People can be sad and selfish at the same time. She asked me if Mom was going to jail. I told her no, and why. She nodded slowly. She didn't cry right away. She held it together through most of the conversation, very practical, asking questions, the way she does when she's processing something big. And then, when I stood up to leave, she hugged me in the doorway and I felt her start shaking, and I held on for a long time. Grandpa really did try to take care of us, she said into my shoulder. Yes, I said, he did. And now we're going to make sure it actually happens. The estate closed 4 months later. The house sold for $347,000. After the HELOC repayment, the estate attorney's fees, and the probate costs, the distributable estate came to approximately $361,000 combined with the savings account. My sister and I each received just over $120,000. My mother received the same. I want to be clear about that. I did not try to cut her out. She was still 1/3 of that will. Even after everything, she got what our grandfather had actually intended for her. There was a part of me that found a strange peace in that, not in the sense that justice was perfect, but in the sense that I had done what I set out to do. I had enforced his actual wishes. I had protected what he built. I had made sure Bria got her degree. Bria started her junior year in the fall with no debt and a small savings account. She calls me every Sunday. She's studying environmental science. She wants to work in conservation. My grandfather would have loved that. My mother and I do not have a relationship right now. That might change. I haven't decided. I'm not angry at her, in the active, burning way I was. During those months of building the file, it's become something quieter and more complicated, a kind of grief for something I lost before I even knew I'd lost it. The version of her I believed in. The mother who was safe. Some people have asked me if I regret not confronting her sooner. I understand the question, but here's the thing I learned from doing this work professionally and from living through it personally. Documentation is not delay. Patience is not passivity. The most powerful position you can be in is knowing everything while appearing to know nothing. The moment you show your hand, you lose your leverage. I waited because waiting was the strategy. And it worked. I also want to say this, because I think it matters. There were nights during those months when I almost walked away from it, when the weight of what I was doing, building a legal case against my own mother, preparing to sit across a table from her, and hand her a document that would define the rest of our relationship, felt like more than I could carry. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't some invulnerable person who processed this cleanly and efficiently. I was a 31-year-old woman who cried in her car in parking garages and lay awake at 3 a.m. wondering if she was doing the right thing. What kept me going every time was the same thing. I would think about my grandfather's face when he talked about Bria going back to school. The way his eyes went soft and proud. That girl's gonna do something, he'd say. And he had made sure of it. He had done the paperwork. He had been careful and deliberate and kind, the way he always was. He had made it easy. The least I could do was make sure it counted. I kept his will, the real one, in a folder on my desk at work for those entire 14 months, just so I could look at it when I needed to remember what I was protecting. His signature at the bottom, in his careful, old-fashioned cursive. I look at it sometimes even now. Sometimes you can't save a relationship. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is accept that what you thought you had was already gone before you reached for it. What you can do is make sure the people who needed protecting actually got protected. What you can do is make sure the right thing happened, even if it cost you something to make it happen. My sister called me last Sunday, like she does every week. She's doing well. She sounded happy. She's working on a research project about wetland restoration. She told me she'd gotten an A on a paper she'd been stressing about, and the relief in her voice made something in my chest go loose and warm. That's what it was for. That's what it was always for.